I hereby call to order this meeting of the Triton Regional School Committee on January 8th, 2025 at 7 p.m. I am Linda Lakowski, Chair of the School Committee.
Do you want to try mine?
It's the speaker, not
Oh, it's the speaker?
Testing.
Hello?
Definitely the, can you hear it okay in the, so in the feed it's fine? Okay. We'll assume your thousands of fans can hear you fine, so you should proceed.
I want to welcome everybody here tonight. A reminder that this meeting is being audio and video recorded. I'm going to read our vision statement. We are a community of learners known for our unwavering commitment to meeting the needs of all students. Through the adoption of best practices and our active partnership with families and the wider community who are united in supporting the development of engaged, successful, responsible, resilient learners, students will be well prepared to be ethical, empathetic, and contributing citizens. Can we please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance? For a moment of silence for Steve Hopper, a Triton staff member who passed away last night. Our thoughts are with his family and friends during this time of loss. Thank you. The Student of the Month selected for January unfortunately had a schedule conflict tonight and will be honored at the February business meeting. Oral communications from the public. Members of the public may address the committee for up to 3 minutes, longer with the permissions of the chairperson. The committee will not engage in a discussion on topics raised during public comment, but may choose to add the topic for a future agenda. This agenda segment will be limited to 15 minutes. Are there any members of the public who wish to address the committee? Okay, we have the consent agenda. The consent agenda contains 5 donations tonight. 4 are for the middle school DC trip. Thank you to an anonymous donor for $2,400. Catherine and Daniel Chadden for $300. James and Jennifer Porter for $1,000, and Wendy Zolio and Kevin Willis for $100. Also, thank you to Alexander Maxon for $100 for Newbury Elementary's holiday gift program. The consent agenda includes 1 request for approval of an overnight field trip for DECA district finalists to attend the state competition in Boston from February 27th through March 1st. Can I have a motion to approve the consent agenda as presented?
I'll make the motion.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? The next item is the student representative report. Student Representative Owen Silva is now going to update the committee.
Everyone I've talked to had a relaxing winter break, and it's been an uneventful half a week so far as everybody gets back into the swing of things. So not much to report. So
That's the theme of this meeting, short and sweet. So I would say, how many of your friends were sick over the break?
5 at least.
All right.
Yeah.
So it's like a percentage.
30%.
Like 30%?
Yeah.
Okay.
There we go.
Seems like our staff is the same, and everyone I've spoken with too, at least 50% of people spent 40 to 50% of the break, someone in their family dealing with illness. So hopefully we're on a trend to better times.
New business. Would any members like to raise additional items for inclusion on a future agenda? Next item is the DCC update. As is traditional, there was no December DCC meeting, so the next meeting will be January 23rd at 6:30 p.m. at Raleigh Town Hall. This will be a meeting where budget discussions begin in earnest, since we will receive the state figures the day prior, so I urge you to attend or watch the meeting afterward if you can. The next item is NEASC update. Attached to the agenda, you will find a letter from NEASC. Superintendent Forget is going to give a quick background on this letter.
So just very briefly, You know the NEASC accreditation process, New England Association of Schools and Colleges. There was a time, I believe during Christopher Farmer's tenure, when there were many schools that stepped away from NEASC, and for good reason. NEASC was becoming its own very isolated entity, and so they received a lot of critical feedback from superintendents across the state and Massachusetts and in other states, and did a nice job morphing and adapting, and so the work that they've done aligns their accreditation process with a lot of the improvement work and planning that we do as a district and as a school. So I'm thankful to NEASC and the work that they did to realign, because I think it is a very meaningful process now. So what you have is a notice to the principal, Patrick Kelly. Just to read quickly, the Commission on Public Schools had its October 27th, 8th, 2024 meeting, reviewed the special progress report for Triton High School and continued the school's accreditation. That's the most important line in this this letter is the interim report that had to be provided. Met all of the work that the school set out. Specifically, they sent commendations on the work the student support team and work to develop an environmental science pathway, the development of further internships to personalize learning, positive relationship between students, staff, and administrators, creation of new classes based on student interest, and then a comprehensive school improvement plan. So that was work that was identified in the last visit, and work that when Patrick had presented to you probably 2 years ago now, said when they came back for their 3-year visit that would be work that they wanted to see progress on. So in essence, this report just basically says, thank you, they were here last year. This is the follow-up report to say, we saw the evidence that you said we would see. And so the next is a 3-year report of progress, and they will be back in 28, I believe, is the next time they come in. Or it might be 27, 28, because it was last year they were here. So.
I just have a quick question. I know the environmental sciences pathway that's mentioned in there hasn't had as much interest as was anticipated. What happens if there isn't like a full implementation during the, kind of the time frame that's set out as part of the NEASC process?
So good question. Part of the new, nimble, more improved NEASC realizes the fact that, for example, the environmental science pathway is very dependent on student interest. When that was launched, there was several students who had the interest. There are still students who have interest. I'm sure Owen could speak to this. And when you have a student with, when you are a student with varied interests in a smaller school with lower numbers of sections being offered, many times the classes you want to take are at odds with other classes. So these were pretty advanced organic, environmental chemistry, and some pretty advanced AP classes. And so there are currently none running, or there are no students who we would say continued in that pathway because we didn't have enough to run those classes. We did run for a year, we ran some classes with 3 and 4 students. So that was a commitment on our part to keep that that 0.2 FTE with those classes running, but we can't do that multiple years. And because of the scheduling, students weren't able to continue. So as part of that process, when they come back out every 2-3 years, there's a pretty extensive report. There's a lot of work that has to be done, and part of that is reporting on the work that's done. And I would say, again, back to the leaner, more nimble, responsive NEASC, when there's a valid reason, they acknowledge that and don't penalize you for it. So.
Thank you.
Does anybody else have any other question? Can I have a motion to receive and file an EASC progress report noting Triton High School's mid-cycle progress and continued accreditation?
Make the motion?
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? The superintendent will now give his report.
Quick reminder there about our budget process. Again, we are kicking that off next week. Your choice was to do that via Zoom over 2 nights. So next Tuesday the 14th starting at 6 p.m. and then Wednesday the 15th starting at 6 p.m. We will be on via Zoom. 5 schools will present on Tuesday night, and then athletics and all other district departments and district-wide will present on Wednesday night. Those agendas will all be posted by Friday, so you'll have Tuesday and Wednesday's documents on Friday. Again, several of you already have, but if anyone, public also, is interested in paper versions of those budget documents that get posted on Friday, just shoot Nicole an email. Happy to print you up a binder or folder, or whatever format you'd like, and we'll have those available by Monday. If you can't get here, let us know. Someone can, on a way over to a school or something, swing by your house and put it in a mailbox. And so excited to get that process going. I will say, now having spent a lot of time going through the details, there are certainly requests and needs, but some of the known increase in expenses, assumption on healthcare, health insurance, I should say, assumed increase in transportation, has been balanced by some savings. $250,000 in out-of-district tuition savings. So there are some areas that we've seen some savings that we weren't so sure would materialize. So it's, I think 2 months ago, we were looking at this as a potential even worse than last year. And I'm thankful, looking at the numbers, that I think we'll be in a better place than we were last year going into that discussion. So. Second thing here is tiered focus monitoring. You've heard Shannon talk about this in the past. This is just to report to you, the Department of Ed, again, is better with this, but the tiered focus monitoring focuses on protocols and procedures. Again, DESE, as a compliance agency, doesn't spend a lot of time necessarily reviewing pedagogy and such. It's more about are we in compliance with the laws and the requirements of what we need to do as a district. So the tiered focus monitoring focuses on student services, special ed and 504, as well as civil rights. And so over the last year, we were in a group. There's a Group A review and a Group B review. A lot of process in Group B. During the 23-24 school year, we were in that review. There was one finding. It was based on a civil rights finding with a follow-up letter for a student suspension. Not that that ever happens, but on a student suspension letter, there was one sentence missing that was required by law. A weird little nuance, and of course that's the one they pull. So it was literally required. We had to do another training, another sign-in, give them a piece of paper, and we met the requirement. So that all happened last year. We had to submit that piece of paper this fall. Again, it's a weird compliance timeline. We got the all clear on January 3rd saying, you passed your test. In 3 years, we'll then, as I noted there, in the 26-27 year, we'll kick off our Group A monitoring review, and that focuses on identification of students with needs, the IEP development process itself, programming support services, and equal opportunity. So equal opportunity focusing on the civil rights side. That Group A is a little more detailed on the actual level of services versus did you check every box along the way. So that's good news. Thank you to Shannon and the entire world that she works with in making sure that we are in compliance with the needs of our students. Any questions on that? Pretty straightforward. Yeah, kind of boring. Question 2, just a quick follow-up to say there's going to be a lot more follow-up. In essence, last month, again, just to rehash, DESE had no guidance ahead of the November 5th vote. Obviously, question 2 failed or passed, meaning MCAS is gone as a competency determination. Some say it was December 5th, 30 days later. Some say it was actually January 4th. Regardless, it's a whole new world. We are post-MCAS competency determination now. There was not a lot of clarity in November around what that meant. Talked about local certification requirements. Certifying local graduation requirements. I brought tonight to the Policy and Advocacy Subcommittee an updated graduation requirement policy, and that's simply because that's a miss on my part. Last time you changed the graduation requirements, which has been several years now, we moved to Carnegie units. It's 22 units to graduate, so nothing new. The policy wasn't adjusted to match that decision that you all made. So that's just a quick semantics update in the policy to match your actual documented graduation requirements. So that will come to you in February as a quick, let's just vote and get that cleaned up. The second piece is what the department has said is you do need a separate competency determination. So the language, as I copied it right and pasted right here from the statute, I'm just going to read this, right? So the competency determination shall be based on the academic standards and curriculum frameworks for 10th graders in the areas of mathematics, science and technology, history and social science, foreign languages and English, and shall represent a determination that a particular student has demonstrated mastery of a common core of skills, competencies, and knowledge in these areas, it previously said, as measured by the assessment instruments described in Section 1. Section 1 talked about MCAS. It was the 10th grade standards. That's now been replaced with knowledge in these areas by satisfactorily completing coursework that has been certified by the student's district as showing mastery of the skills, competencies, and knowledge maintained in the state academic standards and curriculum frameworks in the areas measured by the MCAS high school tests described in Section 1, administered in 2023, and in any additional areas determined by the board. Satisfaction of the requirements of the competency determination shall be a condition for high school graduation. So there's lots of interpretation around what that exact language exactly means. The FAQ document that I linked there originally in November was expanded with some more questions and answers. Some of the key changes are a graduation requirement is not a competency determination. They're two separate things. A lot of questions raised, myself included, if your graduation requirement meets the standards of the competency determination, can your CD basically say, our CD is when a kid meets the graduation requirements? There are other people that say there needs to be an assessment involved because simple coursework is not a competency determination. So there's lots of things to figure out to the point where now there's on the superintendent's listserv, literally a superintendent made a Google Doc and was like, hey, anyone, link up anything you got. Let's just see what people are trying to figure this out, because we are getting, with all due respect, little to no guidance from the Department of Ed, and it's very clear we're going to have to make a determination long before, probably years before, we get any real clear declarations from the Department of Ed about what a competency determination is. Russell Johnson had very explicitly said, we're not going to tell you what a good CD looks like. That is not what we're in the business of. We're in the business of making sure your process, your locally decided process, I love it's local decision when it works for everyone or no one. So this is a local decision. They'll let us know if it meets it or not. So we're keeping that work going. So obviously Patrick, Kelly, and Megan Ober, the Director of Guidance, Anna Bates, and I are spending lots of time, they are all spending lots of time and keeping me in the loop on trying to figure out how best to do this as simply as possible, but also making sure that we meet the requirements. Ideally, we would like to say that if you meet our graduation requirements, that does meet the competency determination. We're pretty clear it's not going to be that simple, but that's the approach we're taking, and I do believe we would be in good company with other districts that they're trying to do the same thing. Just as a bit of background, there is maybe a student or two that this would even impact coming up on graduation in June of 25, so the class of 25. And the path to figure this out is very clear for the, right? This is not, there's nothing tricky. So there are a lot of tricky decisions, I think, in the future. There's a lot of complicated questions to answer around. It's clear in the FAQ document that any student who was denied a diploma based on the MCAS competency determination is now eligible to come back and receive that. Right, we were talking about exactly, I think it's the class of 2000, 2001 is when the MCAS became the competency determination, so we have a 25-year span. Do we have to go find all of those students who dropped out and search them out? Is it incumbent on us to find them to reach out to us? So lots of questions to answer. We certainly want to do anything and everything we can to help current and former students achieve that. But all that to say, I'll be coming to you, probably it will be several of us coming to you to hopefully bring you a simple solution. And I would say with relative confidence, the best we're going to be able to say is we feel pretty good about this approach. I can tell you we will not be able to say, DESE has said, yes, this should work. We're going to have to go with it and see what happens. So, any questions about that? Yeah.
Taking my eye to this paragraph a little bit, like the key pieces here, seems to me, the competency determination shall be based on the standards, represent a determination that a particular student has demonstrated mastery by completing coursework that has been certified as having done so, right?
Yep.
Like, so I'm looking at that and saying it's the completion of the coursework there, but that we have to have evidence that the coursework meets those standards. So,
Achieved
like,
mastery.
well, the student, by doing the coursework, you've achieved mastery, and it, like, that looks to me like a curriculum map that's linked to the standards with the resources that are being administered. And that's what that reads to me as. But
I would say others would agree with you.
Okay.
Yeah, and there'd be others who would say, but there has to be a universal standard. What's the point of having a universal standard for graduation? Or we have to have that universal standard to say, these are the competencies, and this is how we measured it. I think everyone's clear on the what of what needs to be taught. Districts and teachers are given autonomy on the how. But how do we measure that mastery? That's where it seems like the debate is, and I'm not confident we're going to get any clarity from the Department of Ed because it's such a nuanced.
They're going to tell us when we're wrong in 5 years.
Oh, happily. I'm sorry. Yeah, we'll get great
they'll
guidance.
never tell us that we're
Yes.
correct. Okay.
Happy to tell us when we're wrong, for sure. Yeah.
It reads like a nod to standards-based learning.
Yeah.
Which, I don't know, and I'm going to throw Paul Mayette under the bus, but does this remind you of where we shared some time together at a public high school where they pushed for this? So you had, and I'm reading this and getting flashbacks. So you had your, I thought I was crazy. So it looked the way to success back then, which is what DESE had come in and done in the district we were in, was to create a standards-based learning protocol. So you had your coursework, but then each student was required to do a portfolio or all-encompassing project that you as a teacher got to create with little to no guidance that proved that each standard taught in that course was mastered by that student in one large thing.
Yeah.
And then they took MCAS, and then they graduated, and if they missed any piece. It looks like that has been reformed and been brought statewide.
Yeah.
So am I reading that correctly? It looks like, okay.
That's exactly what was going through my head.
Okay, thank you. So yeah, they'll just tell you when you're wrong, but they will not tell you when you are right.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, they were clear that the legal interpretation of this is very nuanced, and within the department, they have varied and mixed opinions all over the place. So.
I know I'll speak for our organization and say MASC has not provided us guidance on this. Has MASS provided any guidance to superintendents? No.
I mean, we have our roundtables and we talk about it, but outside of the guidance coming from DESE, there really isn't any guidance they can provide. I mean, we've talked about it for sure. And certainly the message coming from, Mayor Bork, the executive director, is let's talk about this. The executive committee talks and has been trying to lead discussions and push for actual guidance. But I don't think MASS would be in a place to provide guidance outside of it coming from DESE.
I know sometimes they help with sort of the legal interpretation through their legal advisors that they have to sort of put districts on a common path. So
Yep.
I didn't know if there was any hint that that was going to happen here?
So I'd say there's been some advisories. Generally, we get an advisory, then we get an updated FAQ from the department, and it negates it contradicts the advisory. So those have slowed down.
Okay.
Is that fair? Because I think, right, it's so, there's so much opportunity for interpretation in this language, which is, again, I was against question 2, not because of the purpose and the desire to change the way we assess and hold students accountable to learning, but just this process, in that it takes it apart and blows it up with no path to figure out what end is up. It's crazy.
And my other question is, hard to know what might come down the road, but obviously we have in our graduation requirements now things like the personal finance requirement and things like that. Do you envision that if they're trying to find some common, determination, I guess, across districts that's not an MCAS, that those, we might have to remove those? There's no...
So there's been no, it's been very clear, again, that the graduation requirements are and will remain a local decision. The difference here now is that the competency determination is now a local decision. I would be shocked if DESE were to come out and layer on an expectation about graduation requirements that was never there. My guess is if they were to come out and say, here's what the competency determination needs to be within these standards, it's meeting those. You want to add, keep going, right? Do whatever you want locally. So I can't see a path where any added coursework, again, financial literacy, a great example, that we would have to take that out.
Okay.
No.
I wouldn't want to lose that. I don't
Nope,
understand why
absolutely.
that's not sort of a universal value and why it
100%.
was something that we had to
Yeah.
do here, but I don't want to lose
Yep.
that as part of this process.
Yeah.
So that's, okay,
Yeah.
thank you.
Yeah, again, as written, it's math, ELA, and science, technology, engineering at the 10th grade level. That's it right now. That's all you need to get the competency determination. So anything in your junior, senior year, you're good. You can just finish now, right? I mean, it just doesn't matter. As far as the CD, graduation requirement, yes.
Does anybody else have any other questions?
You like to go above and beyond.
Are you all set?
So on that question, just a couple of the quick things to add. I did just want to notice or acknowledge, Linda, you did a moment of silence at the beginning, but for Steve Hopper, who did pass away last night, I don't want to have this conversation, but as the organization head, understanding to acknowledge the fact that that was an employee who passed away a while at work. So there are obligations that we have reporting to OSHA, working with the police and investigating, right? So just to make sure, a lot of people involved, so we know exactly what happened, and it was tragic. But I just felt the need to just say that to you, that that was a workplace incident, and so we are treating it accordingly. So his girlfriend and daughter were in today and working with them to support them the best we can. Did want to also mention the February Performing Arts Day. Remember we talked about that? That is actually not going to happen. So that was one of those things where everyone was together, really excited, committed, got it rolling, buses are scheduled, everything's happening, and then realized there was lots of conflicts with other things. And so unfortunately, it's not happening this year. It's not off the table. The goal is to still have it happen in future years. Second and third grade is still coming over, is that first and second? Is still coming over on January 31st, I believe, to come over and see that play for the morning. But that full day, the 9 to 1:30, is not happening, basically because a lot of the students at the middle and high school who would have been involved in leading and conducting those workshops are involved in other things and weren't able to pull them and stuff. So unfortunate. Natalie Safley, who helped organize that, who's the program coordinator, was devastated when she realized that and didn't even want to admit it. But unfortunately, we said, we just need to call it because it's just not going to go well. So that's unfortunate, but look forward to that in the future. And then one other question, and this, just bringing it up in my report, looking at the calendar and goals, I reported you last month, still on track to do the SQM, the school quality measure surveys. So there was a message that went out to families is that Monday? It's been a long week. Is that Monday, right? They went out Monday. There'll be another follow-up in a couple of weeks with more details, parents' instructions to opt students out, more details about the survey itself with samples. That will be administered the week of the 3rd. In your goals, at the workshop in September, and we have notes and minutes but no recording, so as I was looking through the minutes with Nicole, it was decided that administered at that point, we were saying late January, early February. So the first week of February, we will have results by the end of February. You wanted to do a presentation of the results at your April school committee meeting, which is April what? April 9th? Yes, April 9th. There's then a week in between, and then the 23rd is school vacation. And then we put it on the calendar, and we're trying to remember exactly the purpose, a goals meeting, workshop style at 6 p.m. on Wednesday, April 30th. So we put it on there, and I'm trying to remember, I know I asked the two of you quickly, and trying to remember why in April, just to make sure we got the calendar right and the purpose, what was going to adjust in April? And does that still jive, or is that something we want to do later in the year when we're looking at goals for the year, or in the fall when we're redoing goals for next year?
It was to see what came out of the survey, I believe, and to see whether we needed to adjust our goals or add things to our goals.
So I guess my question is, why are we doing that on April 30th? Is that for goals for next year, or things you're actually going to adjust between May 1st for the final month and a half of school?
No, I think it was to have, since the surveys would be fresh in people's minds,
Okay,
to see what we wanted to come out of
Okay.
it for probably future goals.
okay,
That's what I believe, if my thought process is right.
okay.
I was going to say, I think it was.
Yes.
I think it was to debrief, because if we waited till September, or waited till the next time where we all sit, that it wouldn't, not that wouldn't be as valuable.
Gotcha.
But to have all of that information, and then when
Okay.
we sit in September, we're not doing that and all, but if, I could be wrong, but that's what I'm remembering from that conversation.
Yep. That's the way my thought
Is that right?
process is on it.
Yeah, that makes sense. I just want, it was such an odd, there was a goals school committee meeting in my calendar, and I could not for the life of me figured it out. And so it just, again, had it in the minutes. I know why, but
Yeah.
it
I
just
believe
wanted to
we
make
made
sure.
it an evening because we didn't want to take up anyone else's
Yeah, makes sense. And workshop style, so it's just, we would present the results on the 9th, and then 1, 2, 3 weeks later come together, and it's just a kind of an open discussion about those.
Yes.
Okay, so that stays, April 30th, 6 p.m. Okay. I have nothing further.
Can I have a motion to receive and file the superintendent's report for January 2025?
I'll make a motion.
Second.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Agreement for regular day transportation services. This item is a carryover from our December meeting, at which the school committee received an updated contract for regular day transportation, which was similar to prior contracts. Questions were raised due to ongoing and unresolved service issues about whether it was possible to build penalties into the new contract for those issues. The superintendent has been researching the question and working on language, and he will provide an update prior to our vote to potentially approve this new contract. I do want to thank the superintendent for his work on this, as I know it was not a small task, and the timing was not ideal over the holiday season, and then the last couple of days has been very trying with the bus company. So I'll hand this to Brian.
So This is the first time that you're seeing the contract. You actually didn't have the contract in December. What you have attached in board docs is 3 documents. So in the contract that says TRSD/NRT contract, that's the kind of contract language. And then there's the NRT bid submission, and that's the kind of relative pricing and submission, and then the bid specifications. So as it says in the contract, number 1 says the contract documents consist of this agreement, the purchase description, if any, invitation for bids. It's basically all the documentation becomes the contract. What you have is the substantive part, the 4-page PDF that is actually signed, the specifications on all the pricing that was submitted by NRT, and then you have the original bid specifications that were put out. That's the document that goes live, we publish, and then people have to provide a sealed copy of their proposal for the costs to submit or to provide those services according to those specifications. As a reminder, Massachusetts law 30B, Massachusetts Chapter 30B requires that for products, goods, and services over 100,000, we conduct an RFQ or sealed bid process. Transportation is fairly straightforward, so a sealed bid process is the way to go. We put out those bid specifications. Anyone interested provides a sealed bid, total cost breaking down, and we award the lowest bidder that is responsive, which means that their bid proposal meets all of the specification requirements, and responsible, which is their past history and their ability to perform similar contracts. So as we discussed last month, we had 2 bidders, Coach Company that is new to the industry, they're currently servicing Newburyport, first year. I should say they, under a different DBA, I'm forgetting the name, did it in the 80s and 90s, but it's currently under Coach Company, and they obviously have historically done coach buses for universities and other academic private institutions. Not Yellow School Bus. So they did provide a bid. They were roughly 160-some-odd thousand per year, collectively about $800,000 over the course of the 5-year bid. We bid as a 5-year contract. It's 3 guaranteed years, 2 individual option years at our sole discretion. You're only involved because by law, Brian and I can execute a 3-year agreement. Anything over 3 years, this is a 5, requires school committee approval. So as discussed last month, obviously NRT was the lower bidder. The question came up about responsibility. And so the responsibility based on past experience. We talked last month about it's been a challenging 5 years. It's been a challenging history in the transportation industry, particularly over the last 5 years, and that's not unique to NRT, that's not unique to Triton, that's not unique to Massachusetts. And in particular, over the past couple years, it has grown increasingly challenging. When I talk to my peers in other districts, NRT is providing, or Salter or other beacon companies are providing transportation, and they're having challenges all over the place. This is not unique to us. The last several days, just to acknowledge some of you all as parents have experienced, it's been a special kind of challenge in that we have 19 runs currently. There are 4 drivers that are out and no spares. And so that's largely meant either doubling up, 13 and 15 is covering 14, or in several cases, 22 goes out, 20 goes out and runs and has to circle back and then go out and pick up 22. There's been challenges with communication. That's been one of the larger frustrations is not, I get the industry challenges, but when we're not aware and families aren't aware to come out 20 minutes later, 10 minutes early, or even made aware that there'll be a change. Today there was another issue and we weren't aware that there was an adjustment, and it was in Newbury this morning where students were sitting out for 30 minutes waiting for the bus and it didn't come. So it's the decision here is a determination of whether NRT has been responsible, and I guess the question is measured against what the possible alternative is, right? And I think it's easy to say, and I would say that if I was sitting with Tim Sheehan or Mary Coker or anyone, right, it's not been ideal. They would sit here and say to you, if I was speaking on behalf of NRT, they have not performed. It's not happening, and they need to be better. The question becomes, would another company, in this case Coach, be able to provide a better solution without that? And I don't have the answer for you, right? And I think that's where we have the ability to determine NRT as non-responsible, right? And per the law, it's very clear that the person awarding the bid has the ability to determine the measure of whether a bidder is responsible. So I'm confident that we could easily say that there's been a lot of frustration. Absolutely. The question becomes then, if we rule NRT to be non-responsible, they were responsive, we would then go to the next bidder, which is the only other bidder, which is $800,000 more over 5 years. They could, right? We could, or Coach could decide to negotiate. That's obviously not a conversation we've been able to have yet. They're not required to. Their bid was their bid, so if they were the next available bidder, they are the winning bidder. We would be able to go out and rebid it. That could get complicated. And so the question becomes, are we in a position to say NRT is not responsive, knowing that the option is we go to bidder B, Coach, and the question becomes, do we have confidence that they would perform better? And we know it would be more expensive. Could it be negotiated less? It's still, at this point on paper, $160,000 more per year. So as a result of that conversation, we talked last month about putting penalties in place. So these were identified by our legal counsel, and I work with Tim Sheehan, who's the vice president, East Coast vice president, and Marianne Coker on the language in here. They've agreed to this. There's some pretty straightforward strict penalties here. It requires a lot of monitoring, which is a little gives us a little pause and one more thing to have to track. But the reality is this does give us the teeth that when they are not showing up on time, right? The big question is, the day-to-day challenge is communication and showing on-time performance, right? Buses being where they are supposed to be when they're supposed to be there, whether that's picking up a student, dropping off a student, or the return trip home. I'm not going to read through all these penalties. You have the document in front of you. But in essence, it's 1/2 of the daily rate. A full 2-tier rate is the cost of the AM and PM. So assuming it happens, if there was an AM infraction, we'd be paying that rate, the full rate for the day for that run would be penalized. If any of those infractions in 6, so it's 611 through 616, and then additional penalties, 621, if we have to find an alternative contract because they are not able to fulfill, there's a penalty. 622, if they flat out no show, it's a 2 times the cost of the rate. So again, I should have the rates in front of me. Actually, I do have the rates in front of me. Excuse me. So if you look on the PDF, that has it's actually the first bid Form A. The 2-tier rate for next year is the $436, right? So the way that the contract is awarded is all the way at the bottom, which is that's not true, all the way at the bottom on the last page. The total basis of award is Form A and bid Form B, which is the regular day plus late buses, plus an assumption on athletic transportation and stuff. So that $9.379 million is the basis for award. The daily rate we're talking about as the penalty is that $436 per run. So if we go back to that, the actual contract document on 6/1, it's half of the $436. So we're talking about $218, right? So that, and then in 6.2.2 for the no-show, it's $974. Did I do that math correct? $72 per incidence where there's no showing. In 6.2.3, this gets to the making substantive changes without our approval. This is not, and we made this clear, and I'll say this here, there are many times, and I've watched it from behind a bus, where a student misses a bus, and so they jump in the parent's car, and the parent follows the bus and calls the bus company, and then the bus stops at the next road, and the kid jumps out of the car and jumps on the bus. Fine, we're going to keep doing that. And so, talking through this, that's not what we're talking about here. We're not talking about there's a tree down on a road and they have to do a detour. This is making substantive changes without our knowledge incurs this additional penalty. And then in 6.2.4, it's a flat out more than 15 minutes late for something outside of their control. If we're dismissing kids late, that's not on them. But if a bus is showing up on these days where I go 20 and 22, that's been the one. 20 goes out and runs and then goes back and get 22. They're a half hour late. That we're going to have a AM or PM. We have the ability to penalize half of that rate off of the AM or the PM each day. So that's written as a 25% off of the full daily rate. So it's basically half of the AM or half of the PM. So the termination language actually was language that has always been in the contract. I think I mentioned that to you last time, that we have a fairly robust termination clause that allows us to terminate, right? No one wants to start a contract and terminate it. That's not good for anyone. It's from a disruption perspective. So I guess I'll... Yeah, so I guess I'll stop talking there and get your thoughts.
Did they just agree to this, or did you have to concede on other points?
So there were a few changes that were definitely made from what our attorney proposed. Full disclosure, our attorney was like, here's a good starting point. These are pretty aggressive penalties, right? So
That's why I was like, what?
Yeah.
Usually no one just says, oh, okay,
Yeah.
thank you for all the penalties, we'll sign. So I'm just
Yeah.
wondering what the other half.
these are, as far as comparables with other districts and contracts, these are pretty steep penalties that they're willing to agree to.
Okay, so
They've agreed to
Triton
this.
didn't concede anything on another
So
term or issue.
So again, there's been discussion over this, but where this landed, they've agreed to this, and this is still, more than any, we never had these penalties in our contract. Most districts don't. There are certainly examples of this. Our attorney, took this from another district, but these are very aggressive penalties that it's work on our part to enforce them, but that they've agreed to, understanding full well. And again, if they were sitting here, they would say, we have to be better, and this gives us the motivation to do that.
Well, all of these penalties surround safety.
Yeah,
I mean, these are not like
and timeliness.
these,
Yep.
but timeliness is safety when you have
100%.
students standing on the side of the road
Yep.
for unknown amounts of time
Especially in this weather.
in this weather, or where parents aren't even notified that their student will be. So I'm not against any of this. I was just wondering, very few people agree to this without a concession somewhere else. So I wasn't sure if in another part of the contract you had to make a concession.
This is
to
the
get
whole
this.
contract. The
So this
only
is
thing that
everything.
changed
All right.
is the penalties. And I will say this, right?
That was nice of them.
Had we not had the months that we've had, I don't think they would be agreeing with this, right? I mean, I think the reality is they understand full well that, I don't want to put words in their mouth, they get it. There is a lot of cause on the table here that's been publicly discussed in that, I don't know about your inbox, but my inbox has been really busy. And the principals and rerouting, and it's been, do you ride the bus?
Not anymore.
You don't, so that's not a good example, but, right, I mean, students coming and being like, it's crazy. It has been crazy. And again, they're limited because they don't have the subs, and that's a challenge. Part of what they are working on is they have other drivers in the pipeline to have backups and spares. When 4 or 5 drivers of 19 are out, there's going to be challenges, period. And that's no different whether it's Coach or NRT or Salter or any other company. The question is, could another contractor attract more business? And I don't know the answer to that. Could they? Of course they could. Would they? I have no idea. I have no idea. And so this contract does, and we've said, the current rate for our drivers has increased pretty significantly with NRT over the past several years. It's up to, it was in the low 20s, now up to the $30 an hour. This contract moves the base starting rate to $32 an hour. Incentives for retaining $8,000 retention bonus if you come in with your CDL, paying you thousands of dollars, or will pay for you to get your CDL. So they're doing all the right things to motivate. And I guess I would say these penalties in this contract allows us and gives us the tools to be able to hold them accountable to that. I will tell you, right, I will cancel this contract in a heartbeat if what has happened lately keeps happening, even if I have to figure out what we're cutting to pay more money. I struggle with that right now, right? I want so badly to just say, make this all go away and give another company a shot. It's so hard not to just come out and say that. And I've said that to them, right? It'd be so easy. I don't know that the other company would be able to do it either. I would love to think they could, but there's no
Can you
guarantee
get
of
their
that.
employment and employment retainment records prior to engaging with them? Like, can that be? Like,
So
if
say
you-
that again?
If you wanted, if the easy answer was just to go with Coach or whoever, I don't know if you'd be able to get their employee and retainment records to see how many employees they have in this area and how long they've stayed there, or if they would have to start and actively hire to fulfill this contract, which would mean they'd have the same
Oh,
problem.
yeah, they have no drivers, right? And so very typically, drivers follow a contract, for sure. Drivers absolutely follow a contract. All of the drivers in Newburyport working for Coach were previously a Salter contract, and they were all Salter employees. They're now Coach employees driving for Newburyport. And I don't know if it's I think it's just about every one of the drivers. They have fewer than us. So likely, drivers would follow the contract. NRT's got some really good payment incentives. I would like to think Coach would be able to match those. I don't know that they could. So I don't think that there's an opportunity for us to just say, well, let's just see what else is out there, right? This is a sealed bid process. The decision we have to make is, we have what's in front of us. We know the lowest is NRT. They're both responsive. We have concerns. We believe Coach is responsible based on 3 months of history in Newburyport. That's it, as far as school transportation. We have concerns about NRT being responsible. Our determination is one of those are non-responsible and ruling them out, and then moving to the next bidder. I don't think we can say, well, maybe they're responsible, maybe they're not, test the waters and see what happens and then come back. I think we have to make a determination of they either are, they're not responsible, and if they're not, do we believe this contract addresses that concern and puts the right structure in place to make sure then my charge is to make sure that I enforce that.
It's important to note that there isn't a lot of companies for us to go to. And it's something that I believe we need to invite our legislators to our budget meetings and have this discussion, that NRT Beacon has monopolized all over Massachusetts, all over the place. So they probably would outbid most companies that try to bid, I'm glad to see that we have these penalties in there, and hopefully more districts start adding these steep penalties in it. And then because I don't think NRT will change the way they do things until it hits them in the pocket, and hits them in the pocket at more districts that they're not conforming to. Unfortunately, I think we have to go with the devil we know with all of these penalties, unless we find that they continue to not have services like they did the last couple of days. The last couple of days have been the worst days because of the weather outside.
Just, yeah.
I mean,
number
it's
of.
bad no matter when this happens, but it's even more so when you have this weather outside. That I imagine many, many parents were only probably out there 10, 15 minutes and then said, forget it, we're driving. You know. Does anybody else have any comments?
I think also, given the points that you made at the start, that we all know that this is not unique to Triton or Massachusetts or anyplace else, I think that does speak to sticking with this mainly because of these. I really like the precedent this sets, not just for us as a district, but for the industry as a whole, and for districts as in general.
Yeah, I guess just a couple of thoughts. So I as well am grateful for the work you put in, because clearly this was, even if it was borrowed in some part, the work that you had to go through with legal and then discussions with NRT had to be considerable. I guess overall, I agree with Linda and Paul, and I think as much as I would like to go with Coach because and look at alternatives, my concern is that NRT is a liability for the district. And I fully acknowledge your point, which is the reason that I'm willing to agree with them, that Coach might not be any better, but we can't have contractors that we're working with that are a liability for our districts, for our families, for our students. That's not okay. I agree, and I believe that when you switch a company, there's always going to be kind of these additional gaps that are created simply because you lose some institutional knowledge that existed previously, even if it wasn't, if it wasn't, if all of the standards and expectations weren't adhered to, at least there was maybe someone who was out on a route who knew we just missed a kid down this side street that wasn't on my list, and I need to go grab them just because it's the right thing to do. And I think that in part is what I would fear would fall into the gaps if we change bus companies right now. Financially is also a concern. I mean, obviously, our budgets have been difficult, so I'd be hesitant to add on the additional cost. I do like the penalties. I agree with Linda that until there's a financial impact, I don't think we'll see much change. I would love to see, I'm not sure who mentioned it, other districts pick this up and start implementing this in their contracts, because until, you can, with 19 runs, you can definitely rack up a fair number of penalties here, making 2 a day. But for a company that size, it's probably, a horsefly. It's not, any major damage that would be done to them. I am glad to see this, though. I do think that we should go ahead with the contract that's here as presented. And again, I just appreciate, I know negotiations take so much longer than I think we ever anticipate. And doing it, this idea was essentially brought up in December, and we have a contract that has, I think, some very real penalties included in it. That's not a small thing with a couple weeks of holiday and everything else in between.
And
have a question.
hopefully in your round table, you guys talk about contracts, especially the penalty incentive contract.
Everything, even things we wanted to.
So, yeah, I have a question. So, Narissa, can you just flesh out for me what you mean when you say that NRT is a liability?
Going with NRT as a liability?
Yeah.
Is that what you said?
Yeah.
I think it's a liability to the district, because we're responsible, ultimately, right? Parents see us as being responsible for getting their students safely to and from school. The contractor is our contractor that we're picking. Even if there's not a legal liability there, it's our reputation is a liability to us, right? The expectation of service and the level of trust in the district, that's all at risk. We may not have any other option, right? The Coach may be just as bad as what NRT is providing, but this does significant damage to the district. And I don't think that's something we can take lightly.
Thank you.
It could possibly sway a family.
Linda, you got to bring your mic in, hon. I'm sorry, I can't hear a word you're saying.
Is that it could possibly sway a family as to whether they remain at Triton,
Yeah.
so.
I just didn't understand it, but it's better now. Thank you.
Sorry, I used the legal term for the lawyer that I probably shouldn't have used. I know.
I will just add, I'm confident that NRT leadership is very clear about, I don't know that that term has been used. They're very clear that there's not a lot of goodwill with families, certainly administrators and, front office support who are scrambling to figure things out and, hey, buses, waiting for these students. And they're very clear there's a real serious reputation problem at this point, and they've got a lot of work to do to figure this out and turn it around.
I mean, to me, I think it's a real safety issue, like Caitlin was saying. I mean, you don't know, like administrators, secretaries don't even know when or if a bus is going to arrive, And what do you tell families when the bus company isn't even communicating that they're tweaking something, so.
I will point this out. There is a family that built a bus stop, like house, because it has been so bad and their house is set so far back that they actually had to build a legitimate wooden structure with a bench to place their children and a couple other children because they couldn't.
And they put a teacher in there too, so that it's not downtime?
Well, but think about that, that's a huge hit to us when that statement is being made, why did you build that? And it's because their children are literally standing on the side of a road in different times of day or not known when they're getting dropped off or picked up, and because houses in all of our towns are set so far back from the road with long drive. I mean, it's not, that's not door-to-door service. So it is a huge, the safety is a real concern on some of these roads. But then I also have to think back when we stop thinking about safety, which is number one, what we're doing to our teachers and our school administrators, because you don't know if a student's actually been picked up. The bus arrives, how is the student arriving? Did the parent give up, but then had to swing by the office first? And then I can't imagine being in the front office of any of our schools on a bad busing day, trying to ferret out where our students are and then getting them into class to learn.
So I have a question, Brian. I thought I read recently somewhere that a local school district got a grant of electric buses. What was that? Was it Hamilton or someplace else nearby?
I believe Hamilton Wenham, I believe both. I know Beverly's been adding them slowly. So there are definitely grant programs out there to provide both the vehicles and the infrastructure. The challenge is generally the infrastructure to charge. We actually did at our pre-bid meeting, we did have a supplier, so it wouldn't be a provider, but someone who supplies the vehicles. And actually there was a vendor there who was trying to bring electric fleets. So it's a discussion we had around the table. The buses are extremely expensive. There are grants there, but then often it's the infrastructure to charge them that becomes challenging. So I think eventually it will be the way. At this point, it's more cost prohibitive.
Just seems like we're locked in a monopolistic system right now.
Yeah, yep,
We just don't have any options.
yeah.
And I hope you're successful in enforcing the penalties in the contract.
If we're signing this contract, I can guarantee it.
Will there be a system in place for tracking the penalties?
Yes, yep. Yeah, so is it 6.1? 6.1 speaks to more nuanced, right? And then 6.1.6 talks about we'll have a formal review process, right? Where we're going to talk about those things because it's about, someone yelling or using language. That's different than in, 6.2.4. that ends can be reduced by up to 25% at the discretion of the district. That's just a straight up, you were 15 minutes late, we're tagging that one for the day. 2 runs,
How are we
15
going to
minutes.
know?
One more time?
How are we going to know if they're late?
I mean, we don't have a.
Late arriving to the school?
So it would be late arrival at the school would have to be the standard, yeah. I mean, certainly if they're arriving to a stop that late, it's going to translate to late to the school. But at any point in time, I could say, I need to know the exact route that bus 13 took this morning, and they can, with timestamps to the second, tell me when it hit every single stop. So they would be able to say, actually, they were 10 minutes late to stop 1 and ended up 15 minutes late to school. Or maybe they were early to a stop, but then ended up late because there was a detour, and then I can't really penalize them for that. So yeah, the tracking on the buses is extensive.
So you have access to the tracking?
Direct access to track them, no. I should say currently no. I'm actually meeting I think it's next Friday. We're all meeting with the crew from NRT, some individuals I haven't met, to talk about the technology changes and the systems they're using that would be more advanced. Parent tracking with the app, that we'd be able to start rolling that out.
Because I think the buses have iPads.
The buses have iPads?
Yeah, currently they have the ability to be tracked.
Yeah. In the vehicle, yes. Yeah. So it's all there. It's, I think, I forget the name, Go Beacon or something like that. There's a portal now.
Where's my bus or something? Wasn't there an app?
So there's a portal that we're now, like, when they're late and so forth, so the staff at school are communicating, documenting behavior concerns and everything through this portal. It would be the app that ties into that same thing, so it's all connected. So that would be, the goal is, I don't know the exact details, but we would be meeting next week, assuming this.
Yeah, because am I correct? Is this an app that is going to be rolled out that parents have access to?
They would have access to. Yep.
Okay, because we were talking, that I thought, was it supposed to be rolled out?
It's been talked about for a while.
Okay.
I know
all right.
even in Kyle's
But we're
tenure, it was
moving-
going to happen, and it
yes,
didn't
yeah,
happen.
okay.
And so I don't know all the reasons. Could have been some of ours, some of theirs that didn't have that happen. The commitment is to get all that technology in place. But I know for a moment now, if I say, hey, the bus was late, they will respond and say, here's the report. No, they weren't. On very short order. And again, to the foot, to the second, knowing exactly where the vehicles are.
For the district, who does that work fall on? So is this another Brian Perry?
So we have to determine this process. We don't have.
Okay, I just didn't know if that's
We don't have
already
we don't have this determined yet, but I would say, we'll be talking about some of this work with the budget proposal. You'll see
We
on
can
Friday.
table it if we, I just.
No, to say there'd be a different structure overall, the oversight in my proposal, but on a day-to-day basis, this would be a simple system. We would ask the secretaries and school office to just say, as a bus is coming in, if they're late, just do a little record. And then we can say, yep, can you just check the record on this bus? And they could say, yeah, they're late and good to go.
Okay.
Yeah. So I don't think it needs to be a really heavy process to confirm those things. And I would.
Or if they were going to have requirements of like, they're going to incur these penalties, but here are the requirements to prove.
Yeah, there's nothing in there that says they can layer a process on
Okay,
this.
perfect.
Yeah.
Thank you.
No, and I would just say, I don't want to speak on behalf of principals and secretaries, but if we say, here's a process to help make sure they're on time, they will gladly take on a couple extra tasks to make sure we're making sure these are holding them accountable, for sure. Yeah. Yeah. And again, when we know about ahead of time, it's crazy, but it's doable. When we have no idea, it's really problematic.
Does anybody else have any questions? Anything else on?
I don't believe so. Your vote would be to authorize the superintendent or school business official, historically been the school business official, to approve the contract based on your approval.
I'm going to make a motion.
Make a motion to approve the contract with NRT Bus for the transportation of students as presented with the effective date of July 1st, 2025 through June 30th, 2030.
Second the motion.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
All right, thank you.
Okay. I know it has been announced many times now, but I wanted to take a moment to celebrate the invitation that the district received from the Massachusetts School Building Authority in December to partner with them on a core project for the Byfield campus. This has been an enormous undertaking over quite a few years, and while I know I can't name everyone involved, I would like to acknowledge the past and present district staff, school committee members, and town officials who have been integral parts of getting to this point, a la Village. With the aging buildings and known problems, the push is on to move through the MSBA process as efficiently as reasonably possible, because it is likely the system failures and associated high costs that we have experienced will continue and possibly worsen. The superintendent has requested on behalf of the district that Triton be placed on the earliest possible MSBA board meeting to be officially welcomed into the process, which is set for February 3rd. That welcome will begin a number of processes, and for the school committee, one of the biggest will be appointing a school building committee within 60 days. We are allowed to begin work prior to that period, starting with the official welcome in February. The MSBA sets some basic requirements for school building committee membership, which are attached. The school committee determines the total makeup by adding additional seats if desired and appointing the individual members. The goal tonight is to design the composition of the school building committee and the nomination process so letters of interest and nominations can begin soon. To start the conversation, I drafted 2 conceptual committee makeups. I do not expect the final decision to be one or the other of those 2 concepts. I created them as just a starting point to generate ideas, and just so we had something to start with. While school committee members might have different priorities, here's how my thought process went when creating these drafts. Meeting the MSBA SBC requirements, including stakeholders I personally believe are relevant, which are town officials, students, staff, parents, guardians, and community members. Attempting to carry over some experience from the facilities subcommittee and, where possible, from the Pine Grove School project. With some work already done and some individuals who have already have a background in this prior work, I am hopeful that including those individuals will help the efficiency of getting this work done. Ensuring as much continuity as possible in student and parent guardian roles, MSBA projects are long and will outlast students who are currently in high school, as well as parent guardians of current high school students. The MSBA does allow new appointments to school building committees when the original members leave during the project, but I believe it is better for efficiency and continuity to have a couple of members in the roles staggered over years so that the school building committee does not have entirely new representation from these groups every couple of years. Distributing the nominations among various groups to help diversify representation, allowing for direct nomination by peers when possible. One of the concepts is intentionally smaller, meeting representation priorities while also placing some value on size to make scheduling meetings and holding discussions easier. The other is much larger and includes everyone I considered. It provides broader representation, but would likely be less flexible and efficient as a public body. I want to note that some I included in the larger concept may not be on the final building committee composition, but their feedback could still be sought. For instance, the athletic director might not be a member, but would likely be asked to participate in meetings at which athletics were discussed as the subject matter expert. or student roles could be removed, but students could still have their feedback requested during the process through surveys or community meetings. Not specifically including their role does not lock them out of providing input. It's very important to note that members of the school building committee will be expected to attend as many meetings as they possibly can. The committee also needs to consider which roles on the building committee will be voting and non-voting. Non-voting members do not count toward the quorum for a meeting. The quorum will be a simple majority of the voting members. A school building committee vote would pass if supported by the majority of the voting members who attended the meeting at which the vote was taken. To play out those numbers, there could be 21 people on the building committee with 17 voting members. A simple majority of 17 would be 9, so that would be the quorum to meet. At a particular meeting, only 12 of the voting members might attend. A simple majority of 12 is 7, so it would take 7 yes votes to pass a motion. One additional thought is that I would recommend that the school committee stipulate members should not be in the same family or household, as this could create an unfair power dynamic. For instance, parents, guardian, and students being from the same family. I know this is a lot to take in. I'd like to open tonight first with the discussion on the composition of the building committee. Once that is determined, we can move through the list one by one to determine voting versus non-voting. And then I would like your feedback on my suggestion about stipulating non-family members. So I know it's a lot of what I said, but trying to get as much information to you to try and start this process. And we attached in the agenda, the exact what has to be in there with the MSBA requirements, and then a list of all the other positions, we'll say, that I could think of.
Can I provide one quick update?
Certainly.
So just to confirm, there is, and I had originally reported this and then corrected it last time, there's no actual board meeting on the 3rd of February. We just start. So it's just literally, that's what I always thought it was, we had to be welcomed in. Literally, they staggered all of their 22 districts that were welcomed into eligibility. They staggered them starting in February, March, April, May, June. So we are just starting on February 3rd. That is when our eligibility period, our 270-day window starts, and it ends on October 31st. So we'll be having a kickoff call end of this month. So in a couple of weeks, we'll get a call to set up with kind of district staff, obviously, the folks that have been involved to this point with the facilities committee or whatever, get everyone on a call just to kind of talk through all these logistics and what has to happen. This setting up the building committee is the first. I also want to tell you, Robin McElhaney is her name. She's our hostess through the next 7 years. Literally, she's our point of contact for whatever it is. I contact Robin and she'll figure out who to connect us with and get answers. I talked to her briefly today just to kind of talk through ahead of that kickoff call how likely it is that we really can speed things up. So the eligibility period is 270 days, 9 months. So again, that starts automatically on February 3rd, ends on October 31st. After that, we're then scheduled, when all those requirements are met, we're then scheduled at a future board meeting. For the rest of this spring, the last meeting of the year is in June. Then there's one in August, there's one in October, and there's one in December. So if we take the full 9 months, we're just past that August meeting, which means we're likely bringing all of the eligibility work to that December meeting, which follows suit for what most districts do. When we were there in December getting welcomed in to Module 1, Manchester Essex for Essex Elementary was welcomed into Module 1 last December, and they were there being welcomed into Module 2 in December. So I asked the question, I asked this on an initial call, and it was kind of a, well, we'll have to see how much we can really accelerate things. They accepted 22 districts in, which is a big number. So those are all phased. So our ability to go fast will be limited both by what we accomplish and boxes we check, but also boxes, that we need to work with MSBA hand in hand. The key pieces being the enrollment certification, which can take lots of back and forth meetings, and then that funding agreement at the end. Both of those, aside from surveys and certifications and votes about stabilization, that's all on us. We can check those boxes quick, but it still may not mean that we can really accelerate it a lot. So realistically, I said, okay, so there's a June meeting, an August meeting, an October meeting, a December meeting. Like, what's the chance? I said, is it safe? And she said, basically, the assumption is about a year out, so the assumption is December. Likely, we could get into that October meeting, so that would be October 29th. Maybe, really aggressive, we get into that late August meeting, that June meeting, which I was like, June? Like, she wouldn't say not a shot in hell, but that is like crazy, ridiculously aggressive to think that we could get everything done, all of our stuff and all of their stuff in 5 months. So I think probably best case scenario, we are looking at an August as a really aggressive, we're pushing on our end, and I'm pushing her all the time, like, we're done, right? Get us on the next meeting for, enrollment. October, really realistic. December, very safe assumption. So just to put that update, that's a slightly different. But like she said today, right, getting the building committee rolling ahead of time. We've got the surveys that we can start doing, getting model vote language to vote that capital stabilization, all that. We're already off to the races.
And what I've done is I've put in the MSBA requirements where, as you can see, Brian can be two of those requirements. We had a minimum of one school committee member. I had put in Matthew because,
All right.
oh boy.
That's off.
You can't remember why?
No, I
It's more
do.
awkward that you're on the committee or she doesn't know why.
I almost choked on my cough drop, but he's a representative of office authorized by law to construct school buildings, and he was the chair of the facilities committee. So I felt that Matthew should be on there. Narissa I had chosen because, number one, she was on the finance committee, and also because she had a big role in the Pine Grove project. So just having her on that would benefit the committee for how the process goes. So, and then I just listed, for the smaller group, how each member should be nominated or selected. So it just comes down to how big we want the building committee to be.
I was listening when you stated everything at the beginning, but I just want to ensure if you go, and this is where my brain is, if you go with the larger one, not everyone in that larger committee has to be voting, correct? So if you went with the larger concept of 27 members, not all 27 members have to be voting. And to run the meeting, you need the majority of who shows up for voting. Okay, thank you.
Yes. And I fell down the rabbit hole of school building committees online today. I mean, I had somewhat previously, but I did today. And I actually found one building committee that only had 5 voting members. So that was literally like they called them their advisors, and the superintendent was not voting. None of the principals were voting. The school business official was not voting. The facilities manager was not voting. It was literally, I think it was the mayor, the school committee member, I'm trying to remember who else was, and three members of the public who had construction, engineering, this is one of the MSBA requirements, construction engineering or architecture experience. Those were the voting members. Everyone else was considered advisory. So at that point, they would have to have 3 people to meet. They could have a ton in that room, right? But they need 3.
Well, when you went down that rabbit hole, can I ask, did that group, because I don't know who it is, was effective?
I honestly,
feel-
I looked at their project and it hasn't been voted yet, but I have concerns about it passing.
Well, no, because I guess my
I'll just say
question
that.
is, because we've talked at length about this, both in facilities here, and so, in Linda's intro, my only concern would be with going larger, and that's why I wanted to clarify voting versus larger, is you had mentioned going through Pine Grove, that sometimes having a ton of humans in one room towards one goal, but maybe not the same vision, can be slower. And I'm not saying that's always a negative, because sometimes pumping the brake, but there's a time and place for that. So I guess my only concern, and I have no issue with either one, my concern with going larger would be, would it still be efficient and productive? So and I'm separating those 2 words because you can be efficient and not productive. So that would be my only concern. That's why I wanted to clarify the voting versus non-voting, but I wasn't sure how those meetings are run.
It's still so, I mean, for the ones that I've seen, actual seen meetings, it's very similar to what Owen's role could be here, where he doesn't participate in a vote, but he can participate in any discussion he wants up until the point that that motion is made. So just like any of the rest of us, he could say, I have something I want to say, Chair Lukowski, and he could, whatever you wanted to say, you could say that, but then once
At any time, Owen.
he can't make that
Jump
motion.
right
He can't
in.
make the motion, right?
Okay.
And once the motion is made and it moves into the discussion on the motion itself, he's essentially out at that point. And that seemed to be where those were, is it when it wasn't, most of them have the superintendent as a voting member, but there are a fair number that don't have the facilities manager as a voting member. I'd say over half do, but it wasn't unusual to see that they didn't have their facilities manager as a voting member. But those people were very involved in the discussion, obviously, but they were serving as a historical information role or a general knowledge on what exists in the building today sort of deal, that type of thing.
Okay.
So I don't know if that helps.
No, I was trying to figure out kind of the process once you place voting, non-voting, and have that group, large or small, so it works the same way as this committee, essentially. Okay. Thank you.
I'm weighing more towards the smaller group, personally. Like you said, you can always have the other people come in as an advisory, but I think when you get too many people, it might make things a little convoluted, even though they may not be voting.
I guess I'll kind of put in a point for the other way of looking at it. Well, I do agree with your point that it can get convoluted. One of the things that I've been thinking about in this whole process is how I view walking into a school. I could go on for hours about the inefficiencies of some of the buildings that I've worked in. And I'm not talking about heat or, systems inabilities. I'm talking about educational inefficiencies. And even so far as to say maybe some things that in the way they spaced out certain areas of the school wound up making a statement that kind of set some subject areas below other subject areas, that the physical space set those areas lower. Art, music, gym were all removed from academics in certain buildings that I've worked in. I could say a lot about those things. I've also walked into some buildings, and I would point out North Reading High School, the new North Reading High School right now, that were clearly designed that are much more efficient, and I could see how I would have been a different teacher working in that building. That said, I don't know what I don't know. So I might point out some things that I think would be great. Matt might turn around and very quickly tell me, here are the logistical problems with what you just proposed. I think that the more people that we have with different experiences and different expertises gives us the ability to make sure that we're not overlooking things, because when these things get done badly, they affect the day-to-day operations of those buildings for a long time.
Yeah, and I'm not saying not include those people, but putting them on a committee and then having them show up to 2 meetings, I don't know, is also looks real great either. Or maybe they don't want to come to the meeting. I mean, they don't want to spend time after school. I don't know.
Yeah, I guess I would say the role of the group is to lead the work. The role of the group does not need to be able to represent. And my fear of the larger is, you look and you have student services and you've got food services, but there might be others. And are we just going to keep adding people, or is it the charge of a smaller group, whether it's 19, 20, 15, to say, if we're talking about classroom spaces, we're going to invite a bunch of teachers, right? If there's just one teacher, like on this one middle school and one high school educator formally part of that, if that's because this group is meeting every 3-4 weeks, right? At least once a month. If the topic is we're going to start talking about classroom space design, or we're talking about science labs, right? This is a bigger project than Pine Grove, where it's not just typical classrooms, then we invite those people in and say, we're going to invite the entire science departments to talk through that. So that would be my concern, is I think it's got to be a group that leads the discussions and brings a lot of people in. And I think a smaller group will be efficient in that if they do it well. To your point, like, there has to be a lot of voices feeding in. That doesn't mean to be, or need to be, that means that they're formally part of the committee. Because once it goes, it's long. It is long, and it is so much work. And I think if you make it a really big group, it ends up people kind of ebbing and flowing and not being there for all of it.
Sorry, just that, so that those that are on this committee, then just, making sure that when you're discussing these areas, I guess the responsibility, making sure that you're bringing in, people that, live and work in these areas.
Yeah.
So that their input can be heard. Because I know I'm looking at both sides. Again, as a specialist teacher, I was envisioning exactly, okay? I know exactly what you mean about classroom placement. But yeah, yes, it's just wanting to make sure that, voices can be heard, people that are living and working in these areas.
When I was coming up with the list, like Owen is here representing the school, the students of the school. And I'm sure Owen, as he listens to these meetings, goes back and has conversations about our meetings. So that's pretty much what we were trying to do, was come up with a list and then bring in experts because you need dedicated people. And that's the reason why I said it's so important that the people who, they might think it's great, I want to be on this committee, and then only come 3 months because, it wasn't what I expected. We need dedicated people who are going to follow this through, because this is going to be so important to communicate it to our communities. So that's what we were trying to do, is come up with people, and we absolutely want anyone who is an expert in whatever the committee is talking about at that point to come in and give their input. They might not be a voting member, but their input would be really important. Like Owen's information that he says at this meeting is very important to us, and we'll take it and figure things out.
And I don't think the structure of your meetings needs to look exactly like a school committee, right? That's what you're used to. So where you have, right, it's a public meeting it's a meeting held in public, not a public discussion. That doesn't mean that meetings can't take on more of an opportunity where even people, right, I see these as being very publicly held meetings, right? If this is the location where we can stream live from, they're all happening here, so anyone can watch them live or go back and watch them or attend. And maybe there's a variety and some are held virtually, right? But I think there's an opportunity where we can structure the building committee to be a more inclusive discussion, that it doesn't have to just be a discussion of the, make up a number, 15, 20 members, but also, again, I'm making this up, I don't know that there will be a meeting on science labs, but like we invite any science teacher, like a public, parents, if you're a science, right, come on in, give us thoughts, and, you know, almost changing the dynamic so that it's really a 2-year discussion as that schematic design's being made and studied about what the needs are and what we really want in a collaborative way. And then it's a smaller group that's taking the action to keep it moving. That's really the only need for the group itself, is to keep it moving in the right direction. So the charge is you're making sure that anyone who represents actually represents. And when we don't represent, great, we go out and ask.
Right, because it's going to be important in order for us to engage the community, to make sure that they are on board with what we're doing here, is to, you know, get people to come in and have a say on, or an input on what they think it should look like. But we need this group to be dedicated and be the ones to move this to the finish line.
I have one, and I don't have a solution, or I just thinking out loud, because this is where it gets dicey being regional. I don't, because we're regional and we do have 3 towns, and I can only envision that each town would want some sort of vote in this. But again, I know it's in the second one with the larger group.
No, they have a member.
It's in the first one? Okay. Where did I see? Can I read? Hold.
It's under the members in the smaller ones.
Oh, just kidding. Sorry.
Absolutely.
Well, I was like, I didn't see it, and that was my bad. Sorry. I scanned. This is why I need paper. This is the moment. Thank you.
Yes, because that's important. And it's the way that I figured nominations would be through those, if that is what we want to do, so that people feel they have a say in who is going to be on the committee. And it's not the school committee making the decision. So it was a way to branch out and get others involved.
What?
I think I came in here thinking that I would be wanting to see the larger group, but hearing what everyone has said, I feel like that smaller, this is supposed to be our lead group that's listening to the community and making decisions based on input at different points. And I wouldn't want to go much smaller than what we have listed here, I think, as the small group. But I think that smaller group would be more efficient, and we do have a building that needs to be done in a timely fashion, and so that efficiency outweighs some of what might be lost by having more people on the committee representing more interests. When I look at the differences between the small group and the larger group that are proposed here, most of those additions in the larger group are people who should have a say at specific times, but might not necessarily need to be part of every discussion. Mm-hmm. And I think that point is what flipped it for me.
Go ahead.
I would say then, if we're going to go that route, I would argue that it has to be more than just, if we don't represent, we ask. I think there has to be a very active consideration of what points might be out there, what points of view might be out there, what is not considered. Are we talking to hard of hearing students about access to the ability to hear things in class? Are we talking to non-binary students about bathroom access? Are we talking to the community about how it's used outside of this? Like, we need to really come up with a long list of, I hate the term stakeholders, but this is a school first. It is a community center second. And that it needs to be something that is really, really representing that, and is, like I said, the best way. When I was talking before, it's not just about like within the classrooms, it's outside of the classrooms as well. Like I pointed out, North Reading, all of the copier access, the classrooms are in small things like this. All of the copier access is immediately outside in that small loop, so that you could, if you needed one copy, make a copy without ever taking eyes off your class. And that's a small thing. Small thing, but the efficiency of that in a moment of a class is huge. And I just think that the input and the broader we're thinking about all of the possible issues, the better building we wind up with. So if we're going to limit it, I really think then that group needs to be very committed to broadening their thinking. Because I would hate for, like I said, I've been in, and when I'm talking about schools that I've worked in, I'm not talking about old schools. I'm talking about very new schools where the architect had themselves a ball and clearly had never worked in education or community.
So, I'll see Owen.
Even if you did end up going with the smaller group, I would still want to advocate for some sort of permanent student position, because to your point, I think even if they're not contributing significantly per meeting, there's still a lot of value in having and hearing about that and what's going on from a peer, just the other students in the school. It's kind of daunting, even if it's recorded and streamed online, it's kind of daunting to sit down at like a 2-hour video and so.
So in the smaller group, there is a student from the high school and the middle school. Do you think that's enough?
So it's one high school, one middle school.
Okay.
I'll actually piggyback up on that, and I don't want to discount. I don't want to discount the middle school, because the middle school is an independent school on this campus, right? However, Owen sitting here as an 18-ish, right, almost 18-year-old, is a very different experience than a 12-year-old sitting at the table, a 13-year-old sitting at the table and having discussion in a committee and expecting them to come to meetings 2 hours when they're short. Right, on every 3 weeks, 4 weeks. And so I guess my question is, I feel like I hear your point, Owen, about making sure there's student voice. Maybe it's 2 high school students, and the charge is representing. And then how do we find ways of engaging all of the students, not just the high school students, but all the middle school students as well? And I don't like that, because I feel like we're taking middle school students out of it. But I don't know how you ask a middle school student, I don't know this, but the meetings are probably going to be at 7 o'clock at night, 6:30 at night, and you're going to ask a 13-year-old to come from a 7:30 to 9:30 meeting. It's not a 13-year-old's world. So it's an 18-year-old's world, right? This is young.
And to add on to that, I feel like, especially when you're talking about the building, there's someone who's been here for 6 years versus someone who's just coming in.
Right, you lived the experience. Yeah, good point.
I understand wanting to not have that interruption when seniors graduate and go off, but maybe that looks like, bringing on the junior at like the end of the year or something and just phasing it, staggering it.
Well, my question on that, very enlightening information, is even if a student does graduate, and maybe that student still wants to be on the committee after that, how does that work? Like if Owen happens to be on it, I'm not saying you want to, but if Owen wanted to be on it when he graduated, if he still wanted to continue to see that through, would he be able to?
This is a local decision, so it's whatever you want. We have to keep the MSBA updated on any changes. So they have to always know the active roster of the public building committee. So if it was a senior and Owen graduates and heads off to college out of town, it's going to be a problem. If he's local, great, we could determine to keep that person on. So that could be a decision you could make locally.
Would he still count for the MSBA as a student at that point?
It's not a requirement of the MSBA.
Okay.
Yep. I actually asked today, her if, I asked Robin, I said, so is there like any model? She's like, oh, there are models, right, from 4 to 50, and they don't really have a best practice. So that's why the document that's linked right up at the top, the basic requirements, is what we have to certify to them with the roles that we're filling, the CEO, the business official, the procurement person. So those are that is, as long as we check those boxes of that document, that's all they care about.
So I have a bunch of thoughts now. So first of all, I just want to say it is super rare to actually have students on the building committee.
Mm-hmm.
Very rare to have students on the building committee.
That's terrible.
I agree, and I think they should be on there. But I just wanted to put that out there that, like, when you're looking at building committees, it's almost entirely like it's a lot. It tends to be a lot of, especially in the municipalities, it's town officials. Some of them, like Pentucket, had I think 4 school committee members on their building committee. Yep. So yeah. So it tends to be a lot of people who have not been in high schools for a really long time and lived the life, which I personally think is wrong. Oh, and I know you raised this. I just wanted to, the larger committee actually has 2 high school students, and the suggestion was to have one in the class of 26, 27, or 26 or 27, and one out of the class of 28 or 29, so that you would have like what would that be? That would be a current, well, it's technically starting next year, right? So it would be a freshman, sophomore, junior, or, right? And a junior and a senior, I think. So I don't know if that goes to your thought, but I wanted to throw that out there. One of the things that I wanted to mention for Pine Grove, one of the things I thought was most helpful was we'd have these big periodic community meetings where the designer would sort of present where we were at, so that everybody sort of got this like primer, even if they hadn't been following the meetings, and it would just be set up, and whoever wanted to attended. Sometimes we had students there, even though they were really young. There were a ton of parents, random community members that hadn't had kids in the school for a long time. One of the guys had done like residential development that showed up and talked a lot. So there were all these sort of voices there that were raising more things to consider, providing opinions, and I think that was really helpful to not just have the invitations, but have these sort of like open times where it didn't really matter what you were representing, in addition to having representatives. And I know this goes against what you said, but I actually thought they had a couple of consultants that worked for the designer that I thought were super helpful. One of them was an educational specialist who had been in the classroom previously and had done a ton of work on, and weighed in heavily in Pine Grove. They have somebody who looks specifically at disabilities, which is how we ended up with the RF systems in all of the classrooms, which is amazing, and I know the teachers use those. And they have security specialists, which one of the worst meetings I sat through because they make you consider all the things that you never want to consider. But the designers generally have those folks on staff. I'm sure it varies how good they are, right?
Yeah,
I thought they were really helpful.
I was going to say, so partnering with the MSBA, right, we've talked about the pros and the cons. The cons, we have to spend a lot of money studying things we don't want to necessarily study. When we're getting half of it paid for, it's all worth it. In that first, so we complete our eligibility, we're welcomed into Module 2, we go out and select our designer in the OPM. Those are on a list with the MSBA, right? So a building that was designed 25 years ago, and you're thinking, for real, versus today's buildings, and some new ones. There are definitely some that may not have been MSBA, right? North Reading was a Dore and Whittier project, Pentucket was a Dore and Whittier project, Pine Grove's a Dore and Whittier. Like, there's a theme there, like really good use of space, good design. So those are the types of designers that the MSBA is going to say, here's your selection to choose from. We choose wisely. So I think we will have an overabundance of things for us to consider, and we'll be saying, well, we really can't do that. We would love to accommodate every single thing. And so I just to echo what you were saying, Narissa, I think there'll be a lot of people through the OPM and the designers who will be working towards every possible, content area or disability or access or anything. There's a consultant for that. And we'll pay for it.
There is a consultant for that, exactly. And lastly, I just wanted to put in my personal opinion, the smaller one is roughly the size that Pine Grove's was, and that was difficult at times to schedule. For Pine Grove, all of the members were voting members, I believe, right? I think. We had a fairly large quorum to...
I don't remember if it was literally everyone, but it was just about everyone. Yeah. It was close to 20, yeah.
And I think having a smaller group and bringing in people, with an eye towards making sure the right people are there for the conversations is good. But also, I don't want to knock students, but if we have to meet during the day, I'd hate to have them count against a quorum. So I'm not sure that they should be voting. I hate to say that, but I'm not sure that those should be voting members. And the same thing, because I know this was a huge problem with Pine Grove, was those people who are architects, engineers, and construction experiences. Most of them are out in the field during the day doing architecture, engineering, and construction. And we had multiple members that were sort of in those positions over the duration of the project, and there was a lot of times that they could not make it. So I would also hate to have them counting against a quorum. Part of it is, specific to the individuals that end up in those roles, but we can't, if we're allowing other organizations or other groups to choose the individuals, we can't control that, I guess, so.
I will say, too, we have to make sure that people understand there's the sexy phase of the building committee, right? We're making these fun design decisions, and then probably 60% of it is when all the decisions are made, and then we're meeting monthly and fighting like, oh my gosh, I can't believe they made that choice. And then you're going back and right? So I think it's important to make sure that what we're looking at is people who are willing to commit and understand that this is the building committee. It's call it a 2-year study in schematic design phase, and then it's approved, and then we move forward, and then then it's still fun at that point. But when it's into construction, we're still meeting, and the tone definitely changes. More important at that point than it is early on. But so I just want to make sure people understand that when we think about adding 13-year-olds and that's there's a lot of work that this group does that some people look at it and say Pentucket's, there should be all adults. There shouldn't be any kids. Sorry. But I love the idea of making sure that it's a representative group if we can get the people that commit to it so that those voices are there throughout the whole thing. And then I think we're going to do this well, right? I just want to say that. I feel like compared to other districts or other committees in the area, I have confidence based on our conversations for the last 4.5 years, 5 years with our towns that they know this is going to be really transparent, really open, and really inclusive.
I will say, I like the smaller group. Just efficiency, productivity, all of that would work. My concern, I liked seeing the middle school student, not because I wanted them up at 9:30 at night, because we all know that is not something I agree with. But also I do know middle school students are at activities and sports until that end. I would like a way to formally integrate the middle school voice to ensure it doesn't get lost, because they are coming from different experiences, different towns even. This is going to be their first entry into Triton, and it's going to be kind of part of their legacy, because they're probably going to be the first to step through those doors or be part of that process where it's actually being built surrounding them. So I would like to see a more formal voice for them if it's not voting, and that's fine and good, but just not to get lost, because there's even an opportunity to voice kind of like an elementary school thing on a different day when it matters, like in a right space. But I just don't want to lose that middle school voice because it's also their building. And they do have some knowledge. They did spend 10-ish years, if you did 3 years of preschool, right through 6th grade, in Triton, in a building that they didn't have a choice in because that was just their home community. So it's a unique opportunity for that class to be part of something that's going to be standing for 50 years. So I just want to say I agree that maybe they shouldn't be at the 9:30 meetings where it's not fun and there's arguing over light bulbs and money and construction delays, but that we should make sure they have a formal voice even though they're 12, 13 years old, and just kind of ensuring that. But above and beyond that, I fully support a smaller group, that first one, and then just deciding the voting members. I would have to hear more of how Pine Grove went and that experience, but.
Jump in for a sec. Linda, was it your goal to get this set tonight and decided?
I think the goal was to at least figure out the makeup of it, meaning whether we wanted a smaller group or a larger group, and try not say who the roles would be, but to try and do the makeup of what, because when February 3rd comes, I mean, we've got to move fast on, because we're going to have to get out to, if we decide that the student council is going to be the one nominating, if the Triton High School school council is, so you need those groups to have time to figure out who they're going to nominate.
Okay.
So we have to move rather quickly.
I'm sorry, that was a big, deep breath.
I
Sorry.
know, I thought you wanted to say so.
Love that we
So that's why we just need to come up with the smaller group, the larger group, and what the makeup of what we want. So
Okay.
yes, it would be tonight because we don't have any other meetings after this.
So can I just say, so the building committee doesn't have tasks during the eligibility period, right? So just to make sure that we're clear on timing. So this has to be done and established, and I think it probably makes sense to hold a meeting to talk through process by the time we're ready for the next phase.
It's 60 days, so it would be April 2nd.
To complete the list. I'm sorry, yeah, right, that is timeline for, yes.
So my only suggestion was, I know we're meeting next week by Zoom. What I would love to do in a perfect world is building committee, Raleigh, right? Raleigh, Pine Grove Building Committee. Pine Grove Building Committee. Anybody else here that was on it? What I would love to do is have you select one other person that was on the committee that was the person, have a Zoom, and just crunch what was wrong or what was good with that committee. I mean, you guys have the experience. You just went through this. We need to hear from you. And you were sitting over there like a potted plant, not offering anything because, no, because you want to listen to the committee, okay? But Brian, I know that you
Never
were,
been accused of that.
but seriously, Brian, you were part of that, right? You know everything, but you're not telling us anything. You two need to get together with one other person, have a quick Zoom, throw it all on the table, and then come back to us next week after one of our little budget meetings or whatever you call it, and just have a good, quick 45 minutes. That's my suggestion, just throwing it out there. It's just, I can't say that what you guys did or what you went through is so valuable to us all, that's all.
But Potted Plant, you were part of making up these proposals, right?
I'm sorry, one more time?
You were part of these proposals, right?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, if you want my opinion, the smaller is better, right? 27 is absolutely untenable, right? It will not function. If I were choosing, I like the 18. I would probably make it 2 high school students, and I loved the way Owen described it. Owen's lived his 6 years at this campus. His job then is to speak, I'm not putting you on the committee yet, sorry. Right? The job is to then speak on behalf of all students. And great, I mean, we've had some wonderful experience over the last 2 years of high schoolers leading conversations with middle school students and them going down to elementary, right? So, I mean, there's great opportunity there to represent the middle school voice. I just don't think it's appropriate. I would personally think it's juniors and seniors, that the first round would be someone who starts up, does a 1 year as a senior, and someone comes on as a junior, and then that person, the senior does 1 year, and then is replaced, the junior does 2 years, and a junior does 2 years. That'd be my personal opinion, just because I think, again, a 16 to 18-year-old is in a different world, right? Do you feel a little different as a senior than when you come in as a freshman? So I just think as far as, again, the job is not to speak on behalf of all students, but to think as a student, and what do I need to go find out and represent? An older student's going to have that purview. So yeah, I mean, I think the smaller 18, making it 2 high school students, I go back and forth with the one from each town concept, a parent from each town, but how do you do that? I mean, we're at 30 then, and so I think then the idea of 2 students that represent the student body, 550 students at the high school and 300 students at the middle school. I don't care what town you're from. We have one school. Similarly, it's 1 middle school parent, 1 high school parent, 1 staff member from each, 1 student from each, but we're using high school students because of age. I think the 18 is a really efficient group. And I do think then I put my adult hat on and I just take the students out as voting members, as the only voting members to take out, because I think it takes a burden off of them, right? Students have a lot of commitments, and if they're a voting member and they affect a quorum, that becomes problematic. I think a smaller group, I personally like everyone's a voting member. If we're asking you to represent, why are we not going to ask you to vote? Like the whole 5 with 82 advisors, what's the purpose? I was going to say comment, my mic's on. I wasn't going to guess on a city or town. Right, so that's my preference. I think that is the group that would, a lot of work to do to establish it. That group could really beautifully represent all of the constituents and organize the work well. And I think that's a group that can, if we select correctly, stick through the 5, 6, 7 years through all the ugly phases on the back half of it when all the important wrap up is being done in the move-in. A fully blossomed plant. There you go, all right.
Can I put one thing out there? If the students are not voting members, can we make 1 high school student from each town? Instead of having 2, 1 of the high school students have 1 from each town, or no?
I don't know. This is just my take from when Brian said it. I was like, 99% of the experience is very similar regardless of what town you come from once you're here. Right. So why would you separate it out into towns when I don't, I guess my kids' experience
I think it's public perception at that point. So I guess like but they're non-voting, so that's why I'm putting it out there. Like in my head, as soon as you said 2, I was like, you don't want that perception that like, what if it just happened to be 2 students from Rowley? Like you don't want that. Do you see, like I'm not against it, but I wanted to ask the question.
Yeah.
Because and honestly, when you say like 2, but you're a regional with 3 towns, like,
So I would say politically, it's important that you have balance with the groups. There's 2 teachers, there's 2 parents, there's 2 students, there's 2, right? And so I went there, right? My brain first went to town representation, and it's not. It shouldn't be. When you walk in these doors, and I know Owen believes this, we're Triton students. I don't care what your zip code is. And I think, Narissa, you just said it, there's nothing on this campus that should have anything to do with where you live. Right? This is about educational space and us working together. Transportation, there's lots of other things, but if we're talking about a design of a building, it's us. So I get it. I went there first, 100% went there first. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I went there as well, and it was a parent from each town, a student from each town, but then, like Brian says, you get up to 30 really quick.
And I think it's kind of up to us too, to push that this is a community. It's not, it's not Rowley, we are a full community. And I think it's going to come back to some of, us, to representatives of, our, to go back to them and say, this is a representation of all of us together, not as individuals.
And it's
Yes.
going to be the students who decide which students are coming here. It's not going to be, it's going to be the high school student council
Community.
that
And with this, with the school council choosing a parent for the middle school, one for the high school, John and I working together to choose 2 members with construction, right? We're going to coordinate, communicate to make sure that between those 2 community members and the parents, that we've got representation, and with the student council, make sure that we've got equal representation of the 3 towns. It may not be a parent from every town, a student from every town, but all 3 towns will be represented for sure.
The first question that comes out of these conversations,
yeah,
so I don't
yeah.
mind just saying it out loud.
No,
Like,
yeah.
this is
And I think
one.
we all went there.
But my brain went there when you were like, okay, 2. I was like, oh, 2.
Yeah.
When you talk about if the student council is selecting the students, then I much prefer, I feel like when you talk about like the content of the meetings, you need someone dedicated. Like you want someone who can, is motivated and comes to you. And I feel like if you have arbitrary requirements based off of towns or whatever, you lose a lot of discretion in picking who it's going to be. And also, in terms of like middle school students, I think you still have the door open to, bring them in on a day if it's something that's pertinent to the middle school, like you had talked about earlier, bringing in teachers when necessary. And also, I just wanted to say that I think it's more important to have a student on there. I think it's less important to have voting. So I don't.
when we were trying to come up with this group, is we were trying to be representative as best we could, as small as you could, or if people decided the other way with a bigger pool of people in the committee. So, does anybody else have anything else? I think I'm done talking.
You're done talking.
Done a lot of talking tonight, Linda. It's impressive.
So I just wanted to respond to you, Paul, real quick, and just say, I don't think there's anything we could say that went really well. The people with the Pine Grove Building Committee overall were dedicated, which was excellent. There were times we did not see eye to eye, and it was very productive, I think, for the committee to hash out and have those sometimes downright arguments. And there were other times where we just all came together and agreed on the same thing, even though I would walk in thinking it was going to be a 3-hour meeting because we wouldn't be able to come to some sort of consensus and everyone would be on the same page. And I don't think the meetings where we argued were less valuable or more valuable than the ones where we agreed on everything. I think the main thing was who you choose to be there, and then these people have to be able to commit. If you're going to step up and say, I want to be considered for this, you have to be able to commit. And I think that's where we struggled a few times, was where people either their priorities changed in life or they walked in the door not understanding how much time it was going to take. Sometimes I think some of them definitely understood the meeting time, but did not understand the prep time. Prep obviously is like not insignificant. It can be hours. And when you come in and you haven't taken a look at sometimes it was like materials that we were getting handed like 4 or 5 days in advance usually. If you hadn't looked at those, you were lost when you walked in the door because everyone else was sort of ahead of you in their thought processes. There were times that it happened to me in my schedule where I skimmed it and couldn't make it in depth through the whole thing to really take a look. And you just felt lost because there was so much material to go through. So I think it's people that really understand and are willing to say, I'm going to stay up till 10 o'clock the night before if that's what it takes to make it through these materials so that I can come in sort of prepared to have that discussion and not be either not productive or just, not making the best use of time.
So how many people were lost from the committee over the course of it, would you say? And were they replaced, and if so, how?
They were not replaced, and that was, I think, the learning is, it was a town-run operation, so we had less purview. We'll have more purview on the control of the operation. So I would say, as soon as moving forward, there were several, and again, it's those community members, especially the construction people that do this for a living and have a hard time getting to meetings. If we see people that start having a hard time, then we say to them, look, this isn't working out. We need someone who can get here and have an honest conversation and switch them out quickly. So that would be something we as a committee would be able to do. I don't even know if that's no, I think you do. I think the school committee votes on the actual makeup, not just so like when we get all the names, you vote to approve that committee. So it'd be a vote at a next meeting of this body, not the school building committee, to just swap out and keep. But there was no change. I don't think there was.
There was one.
Over the course of the whole.
Jay Szymanski, I think, was the original, one of the original guys, and he got replaced by Jeff Vincola toward the end. He made it through maybe 3 years, sporadic, and then ended up, like Brian said, at some point. I think the writing was on the wall for him. I don't know if anybody had a conversation. I think he just decided that he wasn't able to make it.
And so when that committee was formed, was there an expectations sheet, or would that be something beneficial going forward? Like, this is what you can expect to be involved with on a monthly, daily, weekly,
Yep, for sure.
that much material, that kind of thing. So at least people really know what they're buying into.
Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely.
Yep. Doable, very doable. And just to confirm, the building committee makes decisions to recommend to you for approval. So the building committee is not making a determination, right? Like when we talked about at Whittier, it was the building committee making recommendations to the Whittier School Committee. So like it's not same thing at Pentucket. So they'll doing all the work, right? So you'll also be involved as a school committee and invested in a lot of discussions. It's the nuts and bolts that happen to be brought to you for major decisions. So it won't just be one vote at the end of the project. Along the way, there'll be routine updates to say, here's where we're heading, right? As we're going through through the study. All right, we're arriving at renovation is the right choice. Rebuild is the right choice. Those are discussions that come to you as a full group, as it does. You're the only decision-making body here, and then the town meeting is the only decision-making body on the funding of it.
And with Pine Grove, you didn't experience that because it was the town board of selectmen, because they own the building. So that was
That's a good point, yeah.
So my last question, as we're talking about student representation, is actually for you, Owen, to say, if we're talking about this idea of having not current senior, be current junior and a current sophomore, for instance, maybe serving, do you believe that if we set that stipulation at just a single class, that there are enough individuals in that class that would be interested to provide a solid choice for the school student council to be able to select?
Just basing my experience off of
He's treading carefully.
what I've seen in there's the high school council with Mr. Kelly, and there's supposed to be one representative from each graduating class, and the key word is more supposed to. I think if it's just limited to one class, I would be worried about I think that limits the pool a bit. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
So if we said.
I like that too.
Thank you. I think we all agree a smaller group, and if the smaller group that, for concept one, is the representation, other than changing the student configuration, is that concept what everybody sees, what they feel the building committee should be the makeup? Yeah,
Yeah, so it's
Yes.
option one with 2 high school rather than 1 middle, 1 high.
right.
Still 18.
So I guess then, are we only saying that the students would be non-voting? Is that what we determined? That it would just be them not voting? So we'd have 16 members voting.
I'm just going to say my personal preference is to pull out those 2 community members as well.
Because they may not be able to make it to every meeting.
Yeah, I hate to do that because I feel like it does single them out, but just based on personal experience, kind of that was where the struggle was with Pine Grove. I think if we had not been like all voting members, we ran into some quorum problems anyway, but especially during like summer months. But we sort of automatically lost those folks anytime something had to happen during the workday, which sometimes when you're bringing in all these different consultants, you do lose them. That's when you have to meet. I don't know where you're.
I guess I just go back to it. For me, it feels like if we're asking them to be part of this group, I want them to have a vote. I totally see your point. It just feels weird to single those 2 out.
And again, you need the majority, is there a quorum? How is the voting go again?
It's so to actually meet, to
Yeah.
have a quorum to meet, it's a simple majority. So if it's an odd number, right, it's essentially majority. And if it's an even number, it's half plus 1.
So then it's
With this concept, without the students voting, our quorum number would be 9, because we have 16 members voting potentially.
It can be any of those.
correct.
So I feel like with Brian, just that, yeah, we're saying, hey, you're going to step up and be a part of this. You should have a vote, yeah.
I mean, I guess
I think nine
is not a ton, but it's also, if you have only 9 people, this is a
Some
big
big
project
decisions,
to keep
yeah.
proceeding with a smaller number. So I actually
Yeah.
like that it's a pretty decent size that you have to have for a quorum to still meet. Yeah.
Well, it does come down to the individuals, so I guess we can rely on you to make sure you choose the individuals.
Damn, those are my
John, 'cause
people.
that would be your
Of
choice.
course. No potted plant. Got you.
Okay, so what we're going with is the concept one, the smaller group of 18 members, with everybody voting except for the students,
In 2 high school rather than 1.
and 2 high school rather than 1 of each. And everybody's okay with the nominations that we have through the student council, the school council, the building principals, and Brian and John for each one of those. So everybody's fine with those nominations? Okay,
Do we need a vote on this?
yep. Narissa, you
You
want
want
to?
me to?
Yep.
I'll make a motion to approve the makeup, the roles, not the individuals, of the school building committee and process for selecting members as discussed and agreed.
Second the motion?
Any discussion?
Is it the time to talk about familial relationships, or that's not part of it?
Talk about what? Oh, yes.
Families, yeah,
You are
fam-
correct. So does anybody have something different other than trying to have different parent and student instead of having a parent and a student of the same family?
I think you should try to avoid same household.
Yeah.
Would it also be worth adding, not having any of our
Yeah,
Family.
households as well?
yeah.
Yes, absolutely. Yep.
Yeah.
Is everybody in agreement with that?
Well, it'll just be re-coordinating with the councils and stuff to make sure that.
Yep. Did we get a second?
Yes.
Any discussion? All those in favor?
Opposed. I'm voting opposed.
You're opposed, okay. I want to thank you all for your input tonight. I'm going to work with the superintendent on drafting a letter to the nominating individuals and organizations asking for their assistance and providing basic information about the school building committee's roles and responsibilities and the estimated commitment required. Once we have nominations, I will bring the list back to the school committee in March for a final vote and discussion. The next item is the subcommittee reports, policy and advocacy. Paul Goldner.
Policy and advocacy met today. We continued with our policy review cycle. We'll be sending policy section E up to this committee next month as we finished our review there. Also continuing to look at student of the month. We'll be holding more discussions on that next month as well.
Can I ask?
Certainly.
I just wanted to see if the committee would be willing to ask the Policy and Advocacy Subcommittee to also look at advocacy around the Senate's apparent willingness to reconsider the state funding formula. Senator Spilka, when she gave her acceptance speech earlier this month, signaled that she would be willing, that she was willing to lead the Senate into reconsidering the state funding formula and how it affected different districts, and mentioned that she had a number of different senators that had sort of been very vocal about that with her. And I think it might be worthwhile to just make sure that Senator Tarr has a list of our I don't know if you want to call them requests or like items for consideration, whatever. At some point, I don't know if that's a meeting or a letter or something like that, but I would ask the committee if they'd be willing to ask policy and advocacy to take that up at a future meeting and consider that.
Thank you. Personnel negotiations, Matthew?
We met on December 16th to continue talking with the PEC about healthcare, and we do not have any meetings currently set up.
Finance, Paul Mayette?
We met on December 19th. The biggest point made is that Brian Perry has been working to make sure that all of expected spending is encumbered. And looking at that, it leaves us with about $680,000 to be spent for the rest of the year, which is a fairly small amount. Obviously, he and Brian are watching that closely, but it's something we'll continue to talk about. Our next meeting is listed somewhere. January 23rd. There we go.
Thank you, Paul. Facilities, Matthew?
We have not met since our last meeting.
Thank you. Just a reminder that the budget meetings are January 14th and January 15th via Zoom at 6 p.m. I want to thank you all for your input and everything tonight. As you can see, it's going to take a village to get our building. Have a nice evening. Can I have a motion to adjourn?
I'll make motion adjourn.
I'll second Paul's motion.
Okay.
There we go.
Any discussion? All those in favor? Have a nice evening. Thank you, Walter.